Overhead cost. Overhead cost control. Meaning of overheads. The total cost is broadly divided into direct cost and indirect cost. The total of all direct cost is termed as a prime cost, and the total of all indirect tax is known as overheads. Definition. According to CIMA London, overheads is the aggregate of indirect materials, indirect wages, and indirect expenses. Classification of overheads by functions, by elements, by behavior, by functions. Fact, factory overheads, administration overheads, selling overheads, distribution overheads. By elements, indirect materials, indirect labor, indirect expenses. By behavior, fixed overheads, variable overheads, semi variable overheads. Classification of overheads. By functions, factory overheads, its meet indirect expenditure incurred in connection with factory operations. It is the aggregate of factory indirect material cost, indirect wages, and indirect expenses. For example, customable stores, indirect wages, factory power and light, etc. Administration overheads. These overheads are generally in nature and consist of all cost incurred in the control and administration which are not related directly to the production or selling and distribution function. For example, general management, salaries, audit fees, legal charges, postage and telephone, stationery and printing, office rent and rates, etc. Selling overheads. Selling overheads represents those costs which are incurred for the promoting sales, stimulating demand, and facilitating sales for an organization. For example, advertising salaries and commission of sales personnel, showroom expenses, traveling expenses, bad debts, catalogs and price lists, etc. Distribution overheads. It comprises all expenditure incurred from the time of product is completed into the factory till it reaches the destination or the customers. By elements, indirect materials. Material cost which cannot be allocated but which are not to be appointed to by cost centers or cost units. For example, fuel, tools, tools for general use, etc. Indirect wages. Indirect wages are those which cannot be allocated but which appear to be appointed to the absolute by the cost centers or cost units. Indirect expenses. Expenses which or cannot be allocated but which can be appreciated by the centers of cost units. Variable overheads. This is the cost which is aggregate tends to vary in direct proportion to changes the volume of output. Variable overhead per unit of remains fixed. For example, indirect materials, indirect labor, salesman commission, power, light, fuel, etc. Semi-variable overhead. The overhead is partly variable. In other words, semi-variable overheads cost carry in part with the volume of production and the part of that they constant whenever they have a change in the volume of production. For example, supervisor salary, depreciation, repairs and maintenance, etc. Accounting overheads and the steps distribution of overheads. Accounting of overheads. Direct cost or charged directly to the cost of centers or the cost of units without much difficulty. But this is not possible in overheads cost. One of the most complex problem of cost accounting is distribution of overheads cost to cost units. Steps in distribution of overheads. Collection of overhead, classification and codification of overheads, allocation and apportionment of production departments and service departments, reapportionment of total overheads of each service department to production department, absorption of overheads by production units. Steps in overhead accounting. A factory is administratively divided into various subdivisions known as departments such as repair department, power department, store department, etc. Every manufacturing process is to be divided into its natural division in order to maintain natural flow of raw materials from time of purchasing till the conservation into finished goods and sales. For ensuring smooth flow of production, the sequence of operations is taken into consideration while determining the location of various variable departments and the layout of production facilities for physical control of production and maintaining efficiency of concern division of labor authority and responsibility must to be taken into consideration with organized departments. Types of departments: production department, service department. Production department: the process of manufacturing is carried on these departments. Service department render a particular type of services to the other department. For example, repairs and maintenance, electricity, etc. Partly produced departments. A department who is normally by the service department but sometimes does not productive work, so it becomes partly product producing department. Allocation of cost to different projects and services is necessary for the allocation certainment of actual cost involved in the each product and services. Direct cost can be accurated, traced to cost objects because they cannot be specified and exclusively traced on a particular cost objects. Wherever indirect costs cannot be traced directly to the cost of the object because they are usually common to several objects. Cost allocation is the process of assigning cost in the estimation wherever the direct measure does not exist in the quality and quantity of resources consumed by the particular cost of project. Cost allocation is directly, but cost appropriate needs a suitable basis. Basis of apportionment: direct allocation, direct labor hours, direct wages, number of workers. Overheads are directly allocated to various departments on the basis of expenses incurred for the each department respectively. Direct labor hours. Under this basis, the overhead expenses are distributed to the various departments in the ratio of total number of labor hours worked in the department. For example, administrative salaries and particularly salaries for supervision and the appropriate of the basis hours work. Direct wages, according to basis, expenses and distribution among us the departments in the ratio of direct wages and bills of various departments. Relative areas of department: the areas occupied by the different departments from the basis of apportionment of certain expenses like lighting and the heating, rent, rates, tax on building, air conditioning, etc. Light points: this is used for appropriating light expenses, capital values. In the method of capital values of certain assets like machinery, building are used on the basis of apportionment of certain expenses. For example, rates, taxes, depreciation, insurance charges of building, etc. Kilowatt hours. This basis is used to the apportionment of power expenses. Technical estimates. This basis of apportionment is used to apportionment of those expenses for which is difficult to find out the other basis of apportionment. An assessment of equitable proportion is carried out by the technical experts. Thank you.